Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here today. If I'd known what was going to be spoken in front of me, I might have changed my talk a little bit, but not too much, because I think I can follow on with the data I'm presenting today, and it will parallel very nicely the excellent presentation and discussion. So I hail from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and perhaps not many of you are that familiar with Pittsburgh, so I have a few slides. We're a big sports center. This is actually American football on this one. It's different from the football you're familiar with in Europe. And also, Pittsburgh may have been known for the fact that just a few weeks ago, the G20 conference was held in the city of Pittsburgh, and most of the action that you saw on TV actually occurred right on the campus of the University of Pittsburgh. And I have nothing to disclose for today's presentation. So it's interesting that I'm asked to speak today because 24 years ago next week is actually the anniversary for doing the first implantation of the artificial heart at the University of Pittsburgh, and what an amazing time it was in the mid-1980s to do these sorts of things. And in the mid-1980s, the patients were really moribund, they were bedridden, and the technology shown here, the Jarvik heart. I always like to look at this picture and decide that I really haven't changed a bit in the last 24 years. By 1990, we had moved from the use of the Jarvik heart to the Novacure left ventricular assist device. And here, this young man sitting next to his mom was the first patient to be discharged with a VAD implanted with approval from the Food and Drug Administration. Wonderfully, this young gentleman just celebrated his 35th birthday. This is a compilation of the work that's been done at the University of Pittsburgh. Before I summarize it, this is the heart surgeon who started the entire program for us and really has been a great leader in the world in this technology, Dr. Bartley Griffith. What Dr. Griffith is holding in his hands are the fact that there will never be enough donor hearts. So there needs to be the types of technology developed to replace or help patients who are in refractory heart failure. But over the years, as you can see, our center has looked at and implanted any number of devices, starting with the first generation pulsatile pumps, the Thoratec and the Novacure, to the more, the second generation pumps, the HeartMate, to, if you will, finally to the third generation pumps here, the VentriAssist. So this number is already a little bit dated, but we have somewhere between 550 and 600 total patient implants over the years at the University of Pittsburgh. And of course, if you look at just how much support that corresponds to, it really corresponds to 119 years of patient support, days, now well more than 30 pediatric patients. Many of these patients have been discharged home during their mechanical circulatory support period, and 10,000 days or 28 years of out-of-hospital support. So we have seen all types and all applications of mechanical circulatory support at the University of Pittsburgh. So in trying to think about the future perspectives, I referred to some data that was provided to us. The Gordon Research Conference on Assisted Circulation was just held in the United States a few weeks ago, and I asked for data related to device-related complications. And so INTERMACS provided some of these slides that I'm showing. So basically, the INTERMACS registry, of course, was mentioned previously. And over the last 3 years or so, roughly 1,400 patients have been entered into the registry, and you can see that most of them have been primary left ventricular assist device recipients. The demographic distribution of these patients, the primary number of them being males. In the United States, people worry a lot about diversity. Most of them have been white males, and the age has been 51 years on average. Interestingly enough, if you look at the last 3 years, what's striking is that about half of the devices implanted have not been pulsatile type devices. They've not been generation 1 type devices. In fact, half of them now, a little bit more than half of them have been continuous flow devices. And you can see that the ones that have been pulsatile type are the ones that are implanted, fully implantable, such as the such as the NovaCore or the HeartMate 1. And the key from my perspective as a bioengineer is to look at this slide and the next slide, which actually summarizes the device malfunctions, and this is part of the data entry forms that the centers provide to Intermax, and Intermax has compiled this information. The point is that you see that there's a far greater number of malfunctions for the pulsatile pump group than for the continuous flow pump group. And this was actually anticipated when the continuous flow pumps were first being developed for clinical use in the mid-1990s. You can take this data for these adult VADs and plot them as Intermax does, and what you can see, of course, is that over time there's a far larger number of events, device-related complications, malfunctions, etc., associated with the pulsatile VADs than with the continuous flow VADs. But if you take all comers and you look at adverse events over the last 3 years, and the ones that I particularly highlighted in blue shows just what a challenge these devices remain for lots and lots of reasons, much of which was discussed previously. But there are so many of these, either device malfunctions, bleeding is a major problem, infection is a major problem, TIA, CVA is a major problem. These are all major problems, and until these problems are addressed, these devices will not find widespread use, and the comments that were made previously about them basically being used for a small handful of patients is probably correct. On the other hand, if you look at the potential for left ventricular assist device use in adults, the opportunities are really limitless. This slide, taken from characterization by the American College of Cardiology and American Heart Association, characterizes heart failure instead of New York Heart Association class 1, 2, 3, 4, they do it in so-called stage A, B, C, D, starting with stage A, where you just have to monitor your weight, etc., all the way to stage D, where patients are in refractory heart failure. And for the stage D patients, the only opportunity then is either transplant, LVAD, or the very poor outcome of IV inotropes. What the United States is considering doing is looking at these VADs not for stage D patients, but rather for stage C patients. So if you have a device, a left ventricular assist device of one form or another, that can actually intercede at stage C, then perhaps the hypothesis would be that these patients ultimately would not succumb to stage D and be in the stage 4 refractory failure mode. Even more distant, perhaps, but the ultimate application for ventricular assist devices would not be the application in stage C, but would be the application right here. So if you had a device that could be used at this point in the cascade and prevent further deterioration of the myocardium, then you have a true therapy. And of course, if you're ever going to achieve this type of use, then the dozens and hundreds of device-related complications and other clinical complications have to be eliminated. And that is the technical challenge that all of us face who are working in this field. Now, interestingly enough, ladies and gentlemen, most of the innovations for ventricular assist devices, in my opinion, are being made in the pediatric world and not in the adult world. And this work that I'll present over the next few minutes, I've taken, borrowed, adapted from Dr. Tim Baldwin at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. So for many, many years, the choices for children with congenital or acquired cardiac defects has either been ECMO or, over the last decade, the use of the Berlin heart. Now, in the United States, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, or NIH, exerts tremendous impact. So what I'm showing here is a list of all the devices that are being developed and all the ones that are underlined are the devices being developed under funding from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Now, we all understand that in the UK or in the United States, there are orders of magnitude more adult cardiac failure patients who require support of VAD than there are children. And so the manufacturers are obviously going to focus their efforts on developing adult-type VADs. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NIH, what it can do is it can generate an entirely new field by putting grant money funding into the development of this sort of technology. And this is precisely what has happened in the pediatric world. And so I'll give some examples of some of the work that's been developed under NIH sponsorship. And I'll simply also point out that our programs at the University of Pittsburgh are the ones that are involved in yellow. So what you can see here is just the overview of the types of devices that the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, NIH, Dr. Baldwin, are supporting. And the names of the devices are in the far left, but what you can see is the range of opportunity for supporting children. From the smallest of children, 2 kilograms, neonates, to adolescents, from cardiac outputs as low as 0.1 liter per minute, all the way up to 3, 4, 5 liters per minute. Some deliver pulsatile flow, some deliver a diminished pulse flow. Some can be used for several weeks, some can be used for up to 6 months. The opportunity here for devices for children is really quite exciting and quite striking. So as examples of some of these devices, one is the Levitronics PediVas, and this is a device that really is what you might consider the pediatric Centromag, if you will. It's been supported through a grant from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. It's been under development for several years. It's finished its final animal trials, and an IDE submission to the FDA is in place, and we're waiting to begin the first clinical trials of the PediVas the PediVas at the University of Pittsburgh in the spring of 2010. This is an interesting one, the Syncardia, because what you actually see here is the original Jarvik. I think this is a Jarvik 7100, and this is the Syncardia. And basically what you have here is a pulsatile pump, a biventricular pump, if you will, for left-right or biventricular support that can support very, very small children at flow rates on the order of 1 to 1.5 liters per minute. Levitronics is also developing its Ultramag device that will be magnetically levitated, no bearings or seals. It will provide support for up to 3 months. It will cover all sizes of patients up through adults. And this we're projecting to do the clinical trials in Pittsburgh on this particular device within a couple years. Our colleagues in Tokyo, Dr. Takatani, has been working on the tiny pump. You can see some of the configurations here. It's both a disposable and an implantable design, centrifugal pump, very, very minimal priming volume. It's successfully navigated numbers of animal studies. We hear about the progress with this pump every year at the annual meetings. Now, in 2004, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute funded 5 centers to develop pediatric cardiopulmonary support devices. The 5 centers that were funded to develop these technologies were Jarvik, the Cleveland Clinic, University of Pittsburgh, a small company located outside of Pittsburgh, Ension, and Penn State University. I'll briefly show summaries of the work that's been done on these projects. So the Ension device, ladies and gentlemen, if ultimately successful, here's your new ECMO system. And what you can see is how compact it is, how well designed it is, and the features that this ECMO system has are shown on this particular slide here. It features a proprietary biocompatible coating that will prevent plasma breakthrough and leakage and be very kind to the blood elements in circulation. The Penn State heart that's shown here really began decades ago with the Pierce tonic high design for adults, Thortec VAD still being used today. And what you can see here is that Dr. Bill Weiss and colleagues are developing two sizes of pediatric VADs, one for infants and one for children. The big challenge, of course, is the hemodynamics associated with the inflow and outflow valves and these types of devices. And what you're seeing here is some of the CFD, computational fluid dynamics work that Penn State experts have been looking at to optimize the flow patterns into and out of the Penn State pediatric VAD. Dr. Jarvik has started with his adult J2000. This is his child device. This is his infant device. And what you can see here is he spans the flow range and the size for his particular devices. His child-sized device can deliver up to 3.5 liters per minute. His infant-sized device can go as low as 250 mLs per minute. And finally, the device we're developing at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm delighted that our wonderful colleague, Dr. Steen Vandenberg, is in the audience. Dr. Vandenberg worked at the University of Pittsburgh for the past several years and was a major, major contributor to what we've been able to accomplish in the development of this device. But this particular device began with Dr. Antaki Streamliner Heart that was licensed to MedQuest, now World Heart, and this particular pump was once called the HeartQuest. It's now called the Levicor VAD. There's been 2 clinical implants of this pump in Europe. We started with a centrifugal topology, ultimately looked at 3 axial flow technologies and decided on a mixed flow magnetically levitated VAD. And over the last 5 years, we have worked to miniaturize our pump to its current size, where it literally has the footprint of a AA cell battery. So what's next? Well, again, we're relying on the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute to lead the way to help support the next round of development of these technologies. And there's a program, it's entitled Pumpkin, the acronym for Pumps for Kids, Infants, and Neonates. What's particularly exciting about the Pumpkin program is the game plan that the National Institutes of Health has in mind. And basically, they plan to issue awards sometime this fall. And if you'll notice, within 2.5 years of the issuance of those awards, they are expecting those contractors to have an application submitted to the Food and Drug Administration to initiate clinical trials of these devices. The clinical trials would be initiated somewhere around here. A data coordinating center will be awarded, and the clinical trials will then occur over the next several years. At the end of the day, the hope is that as a result of funding that the NIH has provided here, you will wind up with either PMA or HDE devices that will be available to clinicians in the United States and worldwide to treat these children. So in many ways, ladies and gentlemen, it's my belief that the pediatric VADs are really quite exciting, and it may well be that some of these types of VADs will be adapted to the adult patients because of the potential for treating the many tens of thousands of adult VADs, of adult patients who require ventricular assistance. Thank you again to the organizers for your invitation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this nice overview. Are there questions from the floor? Well, let me start with one question. You showed us quite an insight into the pediatric VADs, but these VADs are for a small population, and let's say most of this technology is available for adults. What a lot of surgeons are waiting for is something like a total artificial heart which I can use in every disastrous situation. Is there anything inside?
So if you have devices there that are the size of AAA and AA cell batteries, it's not too much of an extension to think that there may be ways to engineer these technologies so that they would also be suitable for adult patients. And so I think what has generally happened is that first the adult patient technology was developed, the pediatric population was neglected, as it usually is. But now with NIH funding, what you're going to see happen, I believe, over time is that some of these ideas that are going to be successful in children will also find their way to adults.
You also told us that the ideal surgical therapy should be initiated very early, especially with the begin of heart failure, but we all know, since cardiologists are the gatekeepers for the heart failure patients, and they love to spend their pills for heart failure until they refer the patient. So I think it's quite difficult to get these patients early. Is there a different thinking in the US?
No, I don't think so. You speak the truth, of course. Just convincing the next round of NIH study on the class 3 patients, if you will, would be a major breakthrough. The only way we'll be able to convince the cardiologists and the referring physicians that ventricular assist devices are worthwhile therapies is to eliminate all the device-related complications. Ease the implantation, eliminate the bleeding. So it's still incumbent, we heard previously about team approach, it's still incumbent upon the bioengineers and the mechanical engineers and the computer scientists to develop even better technology that ultimately could be applied. It will be a long haul. Certainly the outcomes like the rematch, while very exciting to do such a study, if we're ultimately going to convince the cardiology community, we're going to have better technology.
So There's a question. Dr. Warmer.
Yeah, thank you for the very interesting overview. How do you think these new devices will overcome the problems like bleeding and so on? Is there specific elements in the construction that will lead to that progress?
So all these devices, like you saw for Penn State, have been designed in large part by computers. And so optimization of the blood flow path based on minimal hemolysis, based on minimal platelet activation, these types of computer analyses are now available to all the pump developers. So that's one. The other concept of using magnetically levitated technology where you don't have bearings and seals and you can actually prevent thrombus from forming on these surfaces is another very innovative and exciting type of technology. So I think you're just seeing these more and more applications of the space age, if you will, being applied to pumps for patients.
Thank you very much. Could you expand a little bit on how research and work with the linings of these devices might reduce the terrible complication of thromboembolism?
So, at least in children, the ultimate goal is not to fully anticoagulate them with heparin. And so you have to have two things to make this work. One is you have to have an optimum flow path. You can't have any circumstances where the biophysical forces on the blood cells are too high that would actually cause disruption in some way. The other thing you do is you look at biomimetic coatings. So you look at surfaces that you could lay down on these blood contacting elements like the rotors and the stators and whatnot that will actually reduce platelet attachment and platelet activation. And that's the kind of work, that's why these are all very large teams, and there are biomaterials experts who are part of these teams in terms of developing the types of surface coatings that would be amenable to exactly the issues that you're raising.
And sorry, just a quick question. With regards to the biomimicking coatings that you're talking about, do these have a half-life, or are you suggesting that once they're down, they're there?
These are terrific question. So there are two issues. One is the biologic half-life. The other is would the coating be washed off due to the blood flow, doing the shear on the surfaces themselves. So some of the work I know, the expert at the University of Pittsburgh, my colleague Dr. William Wagner, has been working on these various types of coatings and looking at the types of chemistries that will work the best for them. But exactly the kind of question you're raising is exactly the types of questions people have to look at. So excellent question.
So I don't see any further questions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all speakers. I have the pleasure to close the session.
You guys